Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got spinning around in front of me today is one of the new Alpini officers from the HQ set from Warlord Games. Now these fellas are pretty cool, and if you're looking at doing an Italian army with a little bit of a punch, elite troops that are able to dance across difficult terrain, Alpini are the way forward. Now the uniform here was worth a bit of looking up. I spent quite a bit of time on the actual research for this one, just to make sure that even though it looks a little unusual maybe from what's on the box, this is as close to accurate as I could get it. So bear in mind, I'm going to talk a bit for this one. Now, luckily, all of the paints will be listed in the description below, and thank you very much to Warlord for supplying the miniatures for this one today. So let's get started. Now, in a slightly rare decision, I have gone ahead and applied the basing material to him first before priming him. Reason being is because this fella has quite a prominent base on him, rather than having to take a hacksaw to him or filing it down, I've just superglued him to the base and then put the texture over the top. It's just a bit of PVA and some sand, and once it was dried, with the primer over the top, it's going to be easy enough to paint that in and you won't see the base underneath. So, perfect. I've used premium grey from Vallejo as one of their rattle cans, and it's going to work perfectly well for all of the colours that we're going to use here. Any light grey or even an ivory or bone sort of colour will work, but given that he will be predominantly greys and greens, I think a grey primer is going to be your best bet. We will start off here with olive grey from Vallejo. Now in the first Italian painting guide that I did, where I did both the temperate and the desert uniforms, I went over what is Grigioverde, what is literally green-grey, or grey-green rather. And this darker green is quite a bit different from what I used on those uniforms. The reason being, this is what you would get if you were to take the cloth that was provided from a decent batch, make a pair of trousers out of it, hand it straight to an officer, and take his photo. These did not last this color in the field. If you do want, museum piece quality, and you want to follow exactly this is what this uniform color should have been, then olive gray here is the closest you're going to get. But, as I mentioned in that other video, the moment these were worn out into the field, they were washed regularly, they got dirty, they met the sun, so you can go for a lighter green and it will be accurate. Nonetheless, our officer here has probably got access to some pretty Gucci kit, so he is going to have the nice stuff. Now, even thinned down, this is probably going to take a second coat just to make sure that I've got a nice solid dark green here. Now for his jacket and his hat, we're actually going to swap things up quite a bit. This is green-grey, and you'll see straight away it's quite a lot lighter. Italian officers were expected to have nicely tailored uniform jackets. Quite commonly these would be private purchase. They weren't always, but if you wanted the good stuff, you would go and get your own. And generally speaking, they were a lighter cloth. Not always, but quite commonly. So I'm going to go ahead and pop green-grey over the uniform here. You could also use even German field grey. Now, it might sound ridiculous, but if you look at the Italian captain in Allo Allo, his uniform's pretty spot on. So as far as color reference, that comedy will work perfectly well. Now, green-grey will look quite bright going on. It will dull down a little as it dries, but we are also going to shade it, so there's a bit to happen yet. Don't worry if it doesn't look quite right. You will see straight off that I haven't touched his hat yet, and there's a reason for that. What we're going to do now is to base coat his skin, and I've got here, this is Topaz skin from the Army Painter, and with this, I'm going to blorp it over his face, very scientific term, working up, so that I can get him close to his collar, and then move up and away from areas that I've already painted, and then I can tidy up by painting his hat. So, same too with his hands. Hopefully they'll be the same color. I realize only now I probably should have painted in his walking stick before doing his skin. So I've got Paratrooper Tan from the Army Painter. Any beige or wooden color will work perfectly well here. I'm just going to paint this in and then probably tidy up his hand again. Now we're going to get in paint in his hat. Now, same as before, if you wanted to, you could stick to that olive grey and give him a brand new, wonderful, freshly made felt hat. But I'm using here German field grey, which will give us a nicer, faded sort of Grigioverde. So, again, up to you if you want the museum quality piece, or if you want him to look like he's been in the field for a while. But German field grey, honestly, is actually really close to how these would have looked. So, quick blast of this. And now I've got 3 different greens on a uniform which should theoretically be one colour. That's uniform for you. What I'm going to turn to now, this is German grey, and this is my not quite black that I use for pretty much everything. So his boots, his belt, the feather in his cap, his binoculars, and I'm also going to paint in the beard with this, I think. Give him a nice dark beard, a little bit of German grey. You can use a straight black here if you prefer, but I like having this because, not being a true black, we can shade it and it'll look a little bit more interesting. It's not too fussed about hitting the sand either. I have seen a few different variations on the hatband. Sometimes it's brown, or it might have been a color to match the battalion that he was part of, but I have seen predominantly darker ones. So I've gone with the German grey there as well. So as well as the black leather, there is brown leather, and I'm using Dryad brown from the Army Painter here. Again, don't get too hung up on the colours, the specifics, just something with a nice ruddy warmth to it. So there's Doom Bull brown from Citadel, or even leather brown from Vallejo. It's not really a warm brown, but it'll do the job. So both the map case here and his holster and the strap holding this in place. And now we're down to the last handful of little spangly bits. What I have here is Desert Yellow from Vallejo. Anything of this sort of type will work fine. We're going to paint in the eagle on his hat with this. Don't worry if you splurge over a little bit, because we're going to go back and tidy up with some of these base colors as a final stage. Now the little colored puff up near the feather, which is on his hat, this was called a Alpini, and it was colored according to which battalion he was in. It was white for 1st Battalion, red here for 2nd, green for 3rd Battalion, and while not all of the regiments had a 4th Battalion, that would be blue. So I'll make sure to pop that in the description too. There is one last bit of flair that we want to add, because man, these guys had flair. I have here German camo. This is bright green, and we are going to paint in just a little shape on his collar. Now this is a bit tricky because of the angle here, and the important part is same as everything else. Don't worry if you do go over bits that you want to be a different color, because we can tidy that. We're going to have to tidy this up, my goodness. I'm just going to do it on the one collar tab because the other is at a funky angle. I'm never going to see it, but here, that'll do. And then the little raised part of that pin, any middling silver will work here. I'm using, this is plate mail metal, and I'm hoping I don't now have to fix the green again. Okay, now at this point, if there's any bits that you need to do, like tidy up and what have you, you can do it now. I'm going to use a little bit of green grey to tidy up his jacket, make this collar patch just a little bit smaller, and when I'm done with that, we'll be ready to shade him. So once all that's done, we're ready to shade him. And what I've got here, this is Strong Tone from the Army Painter, mixed half and half with the Speedpaint Medium. You can use the Quick Shade Medium. I just like the Speedpaint Medium because it flows a little more easily, and yeah, fluid is what I like. It's important to thin your shades down, I find. You can use them neat, but it does very, very quickly overpower what you're doing. So I'm going to go over all of his uniform, and his skin, and his everything. We're going to drench the whole miniature in this. Nothing classy about it. Anywhere that it pulls too heavily, you get a big splodge of it that you don't like the look of, just shift it around while it's still wet. And yeah, once this is all over, we'll give him about half an hour to dry, somewhere sunny, and see what he looks like. Once that's dried, you'll have something that looks like this. Plenty of shading, but not too harsh. If you do want to darken down the recesses a little more, just don't thin it out with quite as much medium. What I'm going to do for now is put them aside, and I'm going to mix up a couple of my highlights, and I want to show you how to make that a bit easier. So on my palette here, I've got a tiny wee bit of green-grey, which we used as the colour for his jacket. Now what I'm going to do is pop a little bit of stone grey on the side here. I like using this to highlight grey-green uniforms because it's exactly what it is. It's grey with a tiny touch of green to it. Now when it comes time to mix up your highlights, what I see is some folks just putting the dollop of paint right on top of the base colour. It's no good to you. What you want to do is get a little bit at a time of your highlight and mix it into the puddle off to the side so that you can control a little more effectively how much is going in. So this might work out to about roughly half and half, maybe not quite that much, but once I'm satisfied with the color that I'm going to use, just dab in a little bit of water to help it flow, and then load up your brush just a little bit at a time. You see, the cuff's a good place to start because you can see what you're going to get in an area which is really easy to either cover over with your base color again if this is too bright, or to brighten it up a bit. And my mix looks about right. So what I'm going to do is go over a few high points in the creases of the miniature, just to add a little bit more depth to his uniform. Now there you can have some fun. You can add as much or as little of that as you like. And if you do want to go back, what you can do is drop in just a little bit more of your stone grey and do another smaller highlight along the edges for a really crisp look. Now I'm going to do that with the other two greens, adding just a touch of stone grey until I'm happy with the highlight color, and then I'll highlight those other two areas of his uniform. And that little mix of stone grey will also work for your black details too. So what I'm going to do now is paint in his skin. I've got here, this is Jasper skin from the Army Painter. And I'm going to cover over most of his skin with this, leaving just a little bit of the shaded stuff in the recesses. And then to finish off his skin, we'll use a little bit of Tourmaline skin. And again, this is another Army Painter one. The, what do they call them? Flexible triads are actually really handy for just grabbing a handful of paints, and you've got a pretty good idea that as long as they're in the same color set, from base to highlight, you'll be golden. So here, backs of his knuckles, also paint the top of his cheekbone, across his nose, just to add a bit more depth to his face. Now for that gold thread look, what I've got is a little bit of dark sand, and I'm going to just tap a few little dots, rather than a straight highlight, onto the eagle on his cap. The last highlight I'm going to apply is a little bit of fur brown to highlight the brown leather. And then what I'm going to do is hit him with a varnish. I'm going to use Instar's Varnish Plus. It's one of my favorite mattes. And I will go ahead and paint in his base. And the recipe for that's going to be in the description as well. So let's get a look at what he looks like when I'm all done with him. And so, there at last, our Alpini officer is complete. Now the tricks that I've used in this uniform will be applicable across pretty much any of the Italian range. Remember that ordinarily your basic troops are going to have lighter trousers than what we've got here, so they would have been flipped slightly, but the end result is something that you can apply all across the range. As well, experimenting with the greens is probably a good idea. Like I said, there is a correct museum quality finish to some of this green, and the others are probably a little more realistic for what would have been in the field for a few months. So again, thank you very much to Warlord for letting me have a play with these. It was actually quite a lot of fun. I really like this miniature. And as well, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all my wonderful patrons who keep me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.